speaking of AFL, I'm a massive AFL fan. Caleb is a massive AFL fan. Liz is learning to be a massive AFL fan.
Greater Western Sydney. I will sing the song to prove my loyalty.
Will not sing
Thank you
We want to keep
much.
viewers, not lose them, so we won't have Liz do any musical numbers.
I tell you what, you could say Liz is a big sound, though, couldn't you? I think that would be apt.
That is very true. Here's something I didn't know about the AFL, though. It's a registered charity and doesn't pay any tax. Its tax exemption status dates back to the 1950s and was granted by the government in recognition of the work it does to promote community sport. Well, fair enough, but the AFL is a very different beast these days. It's a $1 billion a year business. The CEO earns well over $3 million a year. And so there are calls for the AFL and other sports, I must say, like the NRL, to start paying tax. This all comes out of a report in the Journal of Australian Taxation. I must say, it's a sad life, Caleb, when you are spending your time reading the Journal of Australian Taxation.
Are you telling me you don't read it every night?
It's been a while, Caleb. It's been a while.
I go home every evening, crack a bottle of red, read the Australian Journal of Taxation, and then I call my accountant up to talk about what I've read. I thought everyone did it.
Not everyone, but let me tell you what it says for those who aren't reading the Taxation Journal. The tax exemption given to the AFL is not justified because on the size of the league's revenues. The tax exemption was designed for community sporting clubs and leagues with low levels of income and not wealthy professional sports entities. Now, it goes on to talk about two problems with the AFL not paying tax, the revenue and the size of the CEO's salary package. But I'm not sure they're good arguments, Liz, because when you look at the size of the AFL's revenue, it's $1 billion. But World Vision have a revenue in Australia of about $450 million. The Salvation Army have an annual revenue in this country of about $892 million. They're charities that do great work. It's not the size of the revenue, it's how much you contribute back into the community. And as for executive salaries, if you're running an organisation like the AFL with so many moving parts, it's a national organisation, you've got thousands of employees, you've got $1 billion a year income, well, you're not going to pay someone pittance to run that. You're looking for someone who would be able to bear that responsibility. They've got 526,000 registered players in this country, most of those in community sports, and 10% of all of their revenue goes back into local sport. What's wrong with that?
Well, look, I don't think anyone has a problem with the salaries of the head honchos who are, say, running the clubs, running the leagues. The problem is, I don't know about you, but this came as a complete surprise to me. I didn't know that these guys ran. We're talking about $1 billion industry here, and even more than that, if you throw in Cricket Australia, the NRL, the list goes on. I didn't know that these guys had this tax exemption. It's very hard to argue when you look at the minutiae of it that this isn't a business, and a very lucrative one at that. When you think of non-for-profits, you think of organisations that focus on health, education, the financially disadvantaged. You do not think of billion-dollar sporting leagues. What needs to happen here is pretty obvious, and that is the law needs to differentiate between those amateur sporting clubs that should be tax exempt. We want all those country kids and whatever else it is. The smaller community sporting clubs, absolutely. And that was the intention of the 1950s legislation, that they would be exempt. Back in the 1950s, we didn't have these massive behemoth leagues who were posting huge revenues, huge profits every year. And sure, they give a bit back, but let's keep in mind, some of their revenue comes from these massive sponsorships, lucrative broadcasting deals. Then we've got the fact that they receive tens of millions of dollars in the form of a percentage of the income of betting agencies. This is a business. There's no way, shape or form in which they should be considered a non-for-profit. And the change that needs to happen is exactly what New Zealand has in their legislation, where they differentiate between the bigwigs and the little guys who should be tax exempt.
And I think this is the problem, right? Now, as someone who reads the Taxation Journal, I can tell you that it is section 50.45 of the Income Tax Assessment Act that provides this exemption. But I think this is the problem, because you wouldn't have an argument against it if you could say that all of the money that flows into the AFL and the NRL is put back into the local clubs and is put to good use. But when you watch sporting leagues, you know, having gay pride rounds and all this sort of thing, spending their money on things that is not really for the betterment of the sport in any way, is making some kind of political overture. And quite often we've seen the big sporting leagues get involved in politics in this country. If you want to go down that road, you can have the right to do it, but we're going to call you a business. If you are a not-for-profit outfit that is solely involved in promoting sport, which is good for health, etc. in the country, I've got no problem calling you a not-for-profit. But if they're going to go down that road, and they have, I think they're a business. They're making shed loads of money. And if you want to argue that football is a public good, and I would say it is a public good,
it's great for our mental health, if not our physical health. Although supporting North Melbourne is not good for your mental health,
it wouldn't be good for your blood pressure either. I'd be going to see your doctor about that. But surely me doing this program is a public good, right? I mean, I'm informing the public of things they may not have known before.
We should be tax exempt.
I'm giving entertainment to people. I'm giving company to people who might be at home on their own, and this is a bit of connection to the world. That's a public good. So why do I have to pay tax? I mean, if you keep following this down the line, basically everyone can argue that what they're doing is somehow a public good, and so they should be classified as a not-for-profit. The only problem with the not-for-profit thing is that they will argue, the AFL, the NRL, every other sporting league, that they are, in the truest sense, a not-for-profit, because they don't deliver a dividend to a shareholder, right? So the money doesn't ultimately flow in profit to someone else. And on that point, you'll probably never win the argument. But when you're making the money they are, it's pretty clear it's operating like a business, even though it's technically a not-for-profit.
Well, any good charity should operate like a business, because if you're not making money, you don't have anything to give to people.
But there are certain liberties you shouldn't be taking if you are a not-for-profit.
I agree with you. The AFL is the most woke sporting organisation in the country. If they are getting charity status, they shouldn't be having all these different rounds that divide the community. I should point out they've got $1 billion annual revenue. Their annual profit last year, I think, was $45 million. So that's important to note.